Good morning, yogis. Thank you for joining us here on Facebook Live as we're going to be joined by Kino MacGregor, who is going to be talking to us about her journey to find peace, her search for peace from recovery from depression, and how she found that through the practice of yoga. So really excited to have you joining us here today as we're trying to bring attention to mental health awareness this week. So we'll be having Kino join us here in just a moment. Until then, we'll be sharing throughout the week several interviews and practices from many of the yoga conference presenters, and really just can't wait to share all of this goodness with you and bring awareness to this issue. So I see Kino there, so we're going to try to add her on in. So tap her. Add to broadcast. There we go. Looks like we're currently adding Kino into the broadcast. So,
hi.
Hi. We managed to outsmart Facebook Live. So, thank you so much for joining us this morning and being a part of this conversation that I feel like is really important, and I'm just really honored that you're here with us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to start off by saying that, I know of you, read some things you've written, and I've seen some of your information, but I hadn't really done much of a dive into your teachings and your writings and offerings, and I obviously did that to prepare for talking with you this morning, and I have to say I'm like blown away by you. First of all, I'm just so impressed by how intelligently and eloquently you speak about the practice and how it's helped you on your journey in life, and just the incredible accomplishments that you've made. And so I just have to say, I'm really in awe, and I feel so honored to get to talk to you this morning. So, I going to scroll the questions here. So, I guess to start with, just to give people a little bit of background, if they're not familiar with you, you found yoga through a search for peace, and that the first yoga class that you tried was Ashtanga yoga, and within that year you were already on your way to India to study with Boyce, who you refer to Guruji, that is your teacher. And can you elaborate, maybe just give people a little bit of that background and history, and also maybe touch just a little bit on what Ashtanga yoga is as well for people who might.
Super. Yeah, so when I was 19, I walked into my very first yoga class, and it was a local gym here in South Florida, and it wasn't Ashtanga yoga, it was more like a Shivananda tradition, and I didn't keep practicing after that. I didn't keep going to that class, but I bought a bunch of books about yoga, and I started to do kind of yoga on my own at home, and just sort of teaching myself how to do the poses, and I would kind of treat that as like an addition to when I look back now, and I can kind of see, was a period of sort of self-medicating, a period of really deep depression. And my primary mode of treating that was actually to party excessively, which, doesn't really go so well. And then I would read these books about yoga, and then I would come home and be totally out of my mind. And then I would try to do some poses and try to almost teach myself how to do the practice. But when I woke up one day, and just realized that my life was not really going on the right track. I was no longer happy, even when I was, partying, and the escapism sort of led to another dead end. And then I just sort of woke up one day and was like, I need to get my life back on track. And then I remember walking by a yoga studio here in Miami that said, in Miami Beach, it had a sign that said Ashtanga Yoga, Tuesday, Thursday, 6:30 p.m. So I just showed up for a class one day, and it was really from that moment that I just felt like I want to keep doing this practice. When I moved to New York City, I joined what's called a traditional Mysore style Ashtanga yoga practice. And then I started doing the practice 6 days a week. After about 2 months, of daily practice, my life changed. You know, I had started getting up earlier, my diet started to change, and then I started to understand that, hey, that you could potentially go to India and meet the founder of this yoga method. So I just instantly wanted to go to India. And the day that I finished reading Guruji Pattabhi Jois's book, I had a dream about him, and I just wanted to go to India. I woke up from the dream and said, I have to go to India. I bought my ticket 2 weeks later, and then I went for 2 months that same year. And I showed up in India when I'd been practicing Ashtanga yoga less than a year. And I really, meeting Guruji changed my life. So for people who don't know what Ashtanga is, Ashtanga comes from the Sanskrit word ashtau, or eight, and it's in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, where there are 8 limbs or 8 different facets to the practice of yoga. Unlike the linear mind, it's not like a sequence where then you graduate from one level to the next level to the next. It's a total and complete path. Within that, the asana component is only one of 8. But in Ashtanga Yoga, as it's taught by Sri K. Pattabhi Jois, that asana component, the Guruji said, was the foundation of all the other limbs, as though without the seat of asana, we don't have any means to understand kind of what's going on in the emotional body, what's going on in the energy body, what's going on in the more subtle experience of the practice. So in Ashtanga Yoga, as it's taught by Sri K. Pattabhi Jois, there's an emphasis on asana as the foundation. And then within that, there's a set series of poses that everybody does to begin the practice. And then there are some individual things that you'll be working on that's really determined between you and your teacher. And then there's a set end to the practice that everybody follows. And the set series is really important because it gives you like a benchmark to keep coming back, rather than just kind of, you know, it's almost like you brush your teeth every day. And so it kind of begins to be a ritual that you perform to almost sanctify the space of the inner body. And then the second thing that's probably a cornerstone of the Ashtanga Yoga methodology is that whenever there's an obstacle in Ashtanga, we ask students to stay in places of difficulty rather than to say, you know, just modify and move on. Ashtanga is sort of like sit with it and stay with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so is that part of the piece of the yoga practice that helped you with some of the depression that you've dealt with in your life, is having to sit in that uncomfortable place?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that there's so much conditioning in our culture, worldwide, really. There's just so much human conditioning, really, in any culture, about how to tune out, how to escape, how to zone out. And honestly, sometimes life is really overwhelming, whether you're experiencing trauma at a young age, in whatever shape or form it may take, or whether your feelings are just hurt in, you know, in an average everyday relationship, and maybe you're too young or you don't have the emotional skills to be able to cope with that. There is so much conditioning to tune out, to zone out, to escape, to run away from anything that's difficult and anything that may not feel comfortable. And for anybody who's been through a period of depression, it's a feeling in the body as much as it is a feeling in the mind. And it includes a deep discomfort inside of your own skin. And it includes just this feeling of eeriness and this feeling of you got to get away. And before the yoga practice, I had really no training in how to stay in those difficult places. So I never did. And this is it's been a really important lesson for me to learn how to make peace with adversity, for me to sit and stay with things when they're difficult, rather than to just immediately think, okay, what can I do to make this feeling go away? Whether it's, you know, going out and partying, or coming up with another hobby, or staying busy, or doing, you know, whatever it is that you may do to zone out and escape and tune out. How can you tune in and make peace with whatever it is that's inside that you might be running away from? So it's been a huge lesson for me, both from the yoga practice and also from the meditation practice.
And, you know, something I just thought about while you were mentioning that is, a lot of people come to the yoga practice and they have this cathartic experience where a lot of people end up crying.
Yeah.
Sobbing.
Yeah.
Usually people have some experience where there's just this release, or these emotions come up that they didn't even realize were there. So before you started the yoga practice, were you aware that you were carrying around this depression, or is it the yoga practice helped you recognize that? And if you already were aware that the depression was there, did it bring it to a new light, a new understanding for you?
I can only look back retrospectively and see that it was there. It really wasn't for me until I had been doing yoga for a little while, and I had been meditating for a little while already. And then I just got in. You know, for anybody that's suffered from depression, I think what they say psychologically is that it's a cyclical thing. It's there, and then it'll abate on its own. So I didn't like I didn't know at the time. It was really undiagnosed. I had been to see therapists and stuff like that just for casual things, but it really wasn't until I remember I went through a period where I just woke up every day, and I had already been practicing, and I just woke up every day and I was just overwhelmed with the reality of suffering, the reality of pain, just the feeling, just this feeling as though just everything, every aspect, every relationship in my life had some glitch, something that was just not firing correctly. And I felt like my whole life was just that feeling when your computer just totally stalls, and like all this, like basically the whole thing needs to either be updated or sent back to the computer store so they can do a massive like system upgrade and like deinstall all the software. I just felt like there were bugs in all the software of my mind. Everywhere I looked, it was just suffering, pain, and I couldn't find the way out. And I just remember I went to my therapist, and I've been seeing her for a little while, and and she just said to me, on a scale of 1 to 10 in depression, I rate you as a 10, and you're a danger to yourself, and I recommend that you start. And she wanted to give me a prescription for pharmaceuticals, and I was like, no, I'm like a yoga person. I'm not going to take these. And she said, looking at your case history, you've been suffering from depression like cyclically since you've been coming to see me, and I was look at it from a broader perspective, it's sort of, we saw that it actually started from the time I was 9 years old, and that there were these periods of depression and these periods of sort of like coming up for air, and then these periods of depression, and then the last one was was pretty dark, and it's the last one. I had it before, but it's that last really dark period that I started to wake up with suicidal ideation almost every day for a period of time. And this is why my therapist said, I think you're a danger to yourself. Like, you need to check yourself in somewhere or seek help. I ultimately decided not to do pharmaceuticals. So I went, she said, think about it for a week and come back because I'm ready to write your prescription. And I just said, no, I'll come back. Like, let me think about this. And I mean, I went through all of the things I could possibly do, and in that space, it was like, should I go? And like, the thing that had brought me the most relief up until then was meditation. And I realized I had stopped meditating for whatever reason. I had just stopped. And now I know why. Is when I sat down to meditate, it felt, I just couldn't take it. Like, it was just overwhelming. Like in my practice, when I was moving around, I could at least focus on, I'm trying to jump back, I'm trying to put my leg behind my head, I'm trying to do a headstand. I could focus on trying to do something. And that was, and the practice also hurts sometimes. So then like you feel something and that draws your attention. And in some ways it was more, it was somehow more embodied. And that allowed my mind to stop for a moment, which is what the practice is supposed to do. So so then I realized, number one, I'd stopped meditating. And so then I thought, I thought, well, should I go to a meditation retreat? Like, what should I do? So I realized that, number one, I've stopped meditating. And then I just started to look at, how to treat depression without pharmaceuticals. I went back the next week and I said, listen, I'm completely against doing pharmaceuticals. What else can you recommend? And she said, if you're really against pharmaceuticals, there's another type of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT or CBT, just depending on who you're working with. And she said, I'll recommend you to go and work with someone. And I shared, I said, I stopped meditating, and that was a big help for me. And of course, my therapist was like, why don't you start? And I was like, right, I'm going to get right on that. And I had this idea in my head that meditation would be like a thing that you had to like, because I've done these meditation retreats and I've been a quite sort of serious spiritual practitioner. And I had this idea that if I was going to do meditation, I would have to sit for a long time and like do it very intensively. And I just couldn't. So I just started off with 5 minutes a day. Just 5 minutes a day. Just sit here for 5 minutes a day. And this has changed my thinking a lot on meditation, because that made a real difference in my life. 5 minutes a day. It was something so small, and no matter how scary it was inside of my mind, no matter how busy I was, no matter how devastating the world around me, I could always find those 5 minutes. And that made a really big difference. And I felt like that was like the first step in me clawing myself back out of that hole, was saying, I'm going to carve out these 5 minutes. These 5 minutes are for my mental health, not for anybody else. I don't care what else is happening throughout the day. Not a 24-hour cycle will go by that I do not sit for 5 minutes. So that was like step one. you're only going to see your therapist once or twice a week. You know, maybe go every day. It's really difficult, but it's very expensive. You know, so I started, and then I started to do this the DBT, and it was really really helpful. The first thing that we started off doing was identifying my triggers, because in this particular period of depression, not only did I have depression and suicidal ideation, but I started to have debilitating panic attacks. I would get just completely overwhelmed with a feeling of panic, claustrophobia. The world would be closing in on me, and I couldn't find my way out. I would start to hyperventilate. I wouldn't be able to breathe, and I would just be like totally like stuck with my back against the wall. Like I can't breathe, I can't move, and no one could help me. You know, my husband would come and I would like, get away from me. I just couldn't. I couldn't. No one could help me. So the first thing that we started to do is identify my triggers, and that's sort of like the work. Like, what is the trigger that brings us on? What are your triggers, and how can you and then how can you manage that? And I felt like DBT was like applied mindfulness, and I felt like it was, you know, like discovering things about yourself and then applying the technique of mindfulness. So if you're doing meditation or if you're doing your yoga practice, when something is annoying, you come back to the breath. You know, you come back to the breath, you come back to your body, you come back to the technique. So it was this come back, but I had nothing to come back to when I was in that state. And there's some really easy things you need to work on, what works for you specifically for what you're coming up with your therapist. One of the ones that really really works for me, because the state was so physically overwhelming and I react so strongly to cold, was actually to, the moment that I feel the trigger, is to grab an ice pack. Or to shove my hand into like a bowl of ice or into the freezer, or just to go like stick my head in the freezer, because I react really strongly to cold, and it's something that cuts the nervous system. So the nervous system response starting to get going, and the cold was a really important thing for me as an applied mindfulness technique to, once the trigger was there, understand how to simply divert my attention from it enough, not forever, just enough to prevent a full-blown sort of panic attack where I'm basically like I'm inoperable for a period of time.
So is the technique like the using the ice for the example you gave, is that pulling your attention off of the thinking, or is it helping you to come into the present moment and be like, okay, my hand is in ice right now, and you know, or maybe a little bit of both?
There's a little bit of both, because the obsessive, depressive, panic-ridden mind is already on its little, you know, it's already on its little thing. Like there's this whole thing, like a proliferation of negativity, which once it stops, before you can take any action, you need to break the cycle. And so it's about breaking the cycle. It's just sort of like stop, reset. It's sort of like just like it's a hard stop for that operating system. And it's not that the root of that isn't going to be addressed. It's just that there's so much fire and momentum at that. It's like in the middle, you know, you're starting to get worked up about something. You're not going to be able to think in a clear state. In DBT, there are a lot of like, they really like acronyms. So there are a lot of little acronyms that you can, you know, that you can pull into. And that I'm not good at remembering those as much as I'm good at remembering like my specific techniques. But there are things like you can't access your wise mind if you're kind of caught in your child space. So it's like there's like this emotional immaturity. You're about to have a tantrum. You're not going to be able to solve the reason why the tantrum is happening unless you just kind of cut the tantrum. So there are things like, if you start to feel your mind getting into a space of negativity, like you can reset, if you have a good memory, you know, you could do, or math is one that works for me. Do multiplication tables, count backwards from 100, count backwards from 10. You can eat a lemon, because the lemons are also something that's really strong physically to get you out of that loop. The other, of course, one of the most powerful ones is simply to, in the middle of your trigger, do your meditation practice. That's an amazing one. And, you know, I talked to my therapist about that, and she's like, yeah, that's totally great, but like right now, let's just do some of the things that are a little bit more distraction focused, because that's like a very high level of it. And this requires you to be in a very sort of open, receptive state right from the beginning. So you notice the trigger is there, and then you would have to remove yourself from the trigger and then go and meditate and then be with it and sort of experience what's happening. That's that sort of highest level of what could happen. Unfortunately, once we're triggered, there's so much patterning and conditioning around that trigger that it's really often just about not feeding that fire for that particular moment until you can be calm enough to meditate, to make your peace with it, to process really.
Yeah, I think with CBT, it's kind of like trying to help set the reset button to prevent that
Mm-hmm.
downward that can
Exactly.
happen. Meditation is so beautiful because it provides that awareness for you
Mm-hmm.
to see that downward spiral starting and to be able
Yeah.
to choose years to prevent that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, it is pretty high level to be able to
Yeah.
stay while you're in that trigger, because it really requires you to be really present with the really
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable things that are
Mm-hmm.
happening.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, what the yoga practice offers, right? When you're holding postures or on the edge of your posture and just being
Mm-hmm.
aware of that. And now, can you share a little bit about what your meditation practice looks like? There's so many different styles of meditation, and I think
Mm-hmm.
different can be helpful for different needs. And what kind of meditation have you found that's been really helpful for you in dealing with the depression?
Well, the three meditation retreats that I've done are Vipassana meditation retreats. So my root and my foundation is always in Vipassana. I'm not really strict about that. I'll usually start off, what my meditation practice looks like now is I usually start off a little while with just the basic calming the mind meditation. And it's usually about bringing the attention to the breath for a period of time. And then I'll usually, it's depending on whether the mind settles. Sometimes it's really just that for the period of time. And then if the mind settles, then the sort of next phase of the meditation is really kind of about embodied presence, which could be just bringing the mind and sort of a scan through the body, or could be keeping the mind at the heart center, or could be keeping the mind at different points in the body, just to really bring about a deep sense of embodied presence. And then the last sort of stage of my meditation right now is sort of like a listening and a prayer practice, where I remain open and receptive to kind of receiving guidance, which I think is really, really important if you have a deep sense of faith. This was a really important part of, I would say, really healing from all those cyclical periods of depression, is finding a deep sense of faith as well.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast that you did recently,
Yeah.
and you had a very interesting experience that led you to where your faith is now. Would you mind
Mhm.
sharing that experience that you had?
Sure. I wasn't raised with any religion, so my parents, my grandfather's Buddhist. My dad, I guess he was raised in a Protestant environment, but they didn't raise me with any religion. And I remember even having trouble when I would have to fill out the form, like like what religion. In the United States, we like to like survey people and like categorize them. So when you're in school, you have to fill out like what's your age and your gender and your religion and your ethnicity. And I remember like both religion and ethnicity for me were always like these things where I was just like, oh, I don't know what to put there. So I would click other, which just felt like really lame, and like it would be like Catholic, Protestant, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Baha'i, and they listed all these different faiths. And I was like, yeah, other. And it said, please specify. And I would just be like, I don't know, just other, just generally other. And when I started doing yoga, I realized that not only did I not really have any sense of faith or religion, but I also really had a strong antagonism towards the notion of God, as it's been presented in particularly American culture, and everything that sort of organized religion represents historically seems to just really be rather upsetting. From numerous perspectives that I could think about, and so when I started doing yoga, my yoga teacher, Sri Patabi Joyce, would often say, you do your practice, you think about God. And I mean, it took me like a good 7 years before, like, what does that mean? Okay, well, let's look and see what the Yoga Sutras say about God. And so there's something called the Ishvara Sutras in book 1 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which talk about God as the universal force of presence. And basically and a key aspect of yoga is surrender and devotion to God. So that was kind of a wake-up call. I thought, well, this is a key tenet presented by Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And my yoga teacher's been saying, you do your practice, think about God. I was like, I'm going to have to figure out what this God thing is. And then there were two things. First, I realized that there were moments of eternality and moments of timelessness in my life. And I had struggled to define that with a whole host of various terms, such as the shimmering oneness of the universe, the source energy from which all love comes from. And it was just like these very long, kind of verbose and poetic words. And I realized I was like, I am like talking about God just very inefficiently. So then I switched and was like, no, this is God. And I've experienced the presence of God. And then the second thing that Patanjali says in book 1 of the Yoga Sutras, that the only true name for God is the holy vibration of Om. And this was really kind of powerful because I felt like, oh, well, a lot of the reactions that I'm having to the word God are very much about the word, and linguistically and how it's been used in human civilization really have nothing to do with this presence of eternality that I've experienced. So then that kind of helped me make peace with it. And just like you say, like, you're not defined by your name, and there's an experience of something that's grander than any diction and syntax can possibly hold. And if we're talking about a limitless force in the universe, then 3 letters are never going to be enough to define, that presence. I think in the old Hebrew, if we're looking in the Judeo-Christian terminology of God, then if you look in the old Hebrew, the old Hebrew, Jehovah or Yahweh is considered to be so holy that some very traditional, the people who follow Judaism will not actually pronounce that or avoid pronouncing that out of respect for the name of God. So I think about that, I think, wow, okay, so G-O-D is just these 3 words. So that was sort of like the first level. The second thing that happened for me was experiential, which is just I was on the way to teach yoga in Dallas, and then I had an open vision where Jesus Christ appeared to me. And my first reaction was like, you've got to be kidding me, My first reaction was not like, wow, I'm so happy to meet you. I've been waiting to meet you my whole life. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I'm not one of those crazy people. Like, I think you got the wrong person. I'm a yoga person. I was really available for the Buddha, or, I was really like, where's the Buddha? Like, where's, I'm thinking like, what's going on? You got the wrong girl. Like, did you miss by, meter? And the second thing that happened for me was the same thing that happened when I met my yoga teacher, is that my heart leapt up and said yes. It was like something in me recognized you are a true guru. And so when I did that, it was just this open vision in the middle of an airplane, like everything turned to white, and I just felt his presence. And then literally like Jesus Christ was standing in front of me, and I just, but after my heart leapt up and said yes, I felt his hands on my head, and I just felt this wind rush through my body, which, if you look in the yoga tradition, this is like Diksha or Shaktipat, when the guru touches you and there's a transference of energy. And I just felt like, wow, I met the highest guru. Wow. And then from that moment forward, I was like, well, I think Jesus is my guru. Like, that's kind of how I feel. And I'd never read the Bible before. So I was like, I thought about that after the vision sort of subsided. And then I just sort of thought, well, maybe I should kind of read that. So I started reading the Bible, and I started with the New Testament. And what I realized is that since that moment, in my meditation and in my yoga practice, really in my life, I'm able to tune into a place of imperturbable peace. And it's almost like underneath all of my stuff, I feel that just like before in my yoga practice, underneath all the ups and downs in my yoga practice, I would always have Guruji as a rock, and I could just go in him and be in his presence. Now I feel like in my life, no matter all the ups and downs that are out there, I feel like I have a place where there is imperturbable peace. And it's not outside of myself, it's right inside of me, and I carry it with me wherever I am, and it's like a direct line. And it's just, I realize that I can believe in myself. Like, I can believe in myself, but I can never surrender into myself. So one of the biggest sources of my depression was being really concerned that everything, like, I was going to screw everything up. Do you know what I mean? Like, that I was just going to be like, okay, it's all going to get really messed up, and I'm not going to be able to hold the peace, or that I had already messed everything up. And then it was just like, I'm sitting in this huge grand mess, and I can't control everything. I can't put all the pieces together. It's never going to work out. Nothing I do is ever going to be good enough. No matter how hard I try, there's always going to be shortcomings. And not to mention all the mistakes I have made that I can never make atonement for. And I was just like filled with this overwhelming sense of the impossibility and the suffering, the sort of the endless suffering of life. And I realized that there was no one else that I could trust. And so there would be all these things that people would write, like in, contemporary kind of new age culture, about like, send it out to the universe. And I was like, who is the universe? Like, send it out generally to the universe. And I was like, who is this universe? Why do I just trust the universe? Like, have you met the entire universe? Like, do you trust the universe? And then, like, just trust that, like, life is working out in your favor. And I was like, is life working out in my favor? Is that really true? Because I can look back and I can see, the abuse that I've suffered, the sexual abuse that I suffered when I was a little girl. I can see all the times my heart was broken. I can see all the times people screwed me over. And I'm like, is that really, that was in my favor? And it was sort of like this really bitter pill that I couldn't swallow in this kind of just general abstract sense. But when I started to tune into the divine and started to feel like, well, I've met the presence of God, and then I started to understand, oh, I met you, I trust you, I can surrender to you, you've got it, I feel you, you're real. Okay.
Ability to surrender to God, has that helped with dealing with the cyclical nature of the depression.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then, if there was something like, for example, something that say was a trigger in the past, it was like I would focus on it and like think that I needed to go in and fix it right away. I'm like, I don't really like when things are unresolved. It really bothers me. So if I would have an argument with someone, say there would be something, I would sit through whatever needed to be sat through to try to get a resolution, which means I would tolerate behavior that was not acceptable for me, which means I would lose my sense of self-respect. So let's say I'm in an argument with someone. They raise their voice at me. They cross lines and boundaries for me because I think I need to fix it. I took that before. So a change of perspective. Number one, I start to identify things that are not acceptable for me, because if I let things that are not acceptable for me happen, then that's when my trigger starts to happen, because it's like something inside me knows it's not okay. You're speaking to me in a way that's not okay. I sit there and I take it. I lose respect for myself. Then it's like a whole downward spiral from there. So then change of perspective. And then, if I'm in a conversation, I'm having an argument with someone, and then they start to raise their voice at me or speak to me in a way that is derogatory and or in a sexually inappropriate manner, I just simply state, the level of aggression in this conversation, the level of inappropriate sexual comments in this conversation has far exceeded the limits of what's acceptable for me. Thank you very much. I'm done. And I would get up and leave, or just end the conversation. And then I would turn it over to God. Okay, God, if this is something you want me to do, fix it. If it's not something you want me to do, close the door. I'm done. Yeah. And I would just, be done with it. And then continue with my day. And then if the door was meant to be closed, was closed. And if the door was meant to be open, then it would open, and it was really powerful, because in the past I would stay with it and take all of those sort of abusive comments and conversations. And it is an unfortunate circumstance of kind of just being a female out in the world, that sometimes there are conversations that take illicit sexual turns when you're in the middle of a business meeting, and it's just not really appropriate. How to deal with that and what that does for you, particularly if you're a survivor of sexual abuse. It's very difficult to set boundaries, because all of that patterning, especially happened when you were really young, all of that patterning from when you're young, it comes up, and oftentimes you're just like caught in a state of shock and immobilized rather than being able to take action. So it's can be very very difficult. And so I really think that it was having a deep sense of faith and understanding that, hey, you know what, I'm not going to solve this problem, but I'm going to take care of me, and I'm worth taking care of right now, and the only power that can solve it is on it. So super, I'm good. I'm going to leave and go get a chai now.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing all of that. And having that faith is really a beautiful quality that allows us to do what we can and then give it the rest to higher power. So that's wonderful that you've been able to find that for yourself. And we're kind of closing in on time, but I just had one or two more questions.
Okay.
One thing I'm curious about, because you've been married for about how long now? 15 years?
Guys, we've been together for about 15 years and married for about 10 of those.
And I know that mental health challenges can really take a toll on marriage. Yeah. So do you have any advice for people out there who maybe for the person who's suffering or for their loved one on any things that you have found that or are helpful perspectives to keep in mind when
Yeah, that's a really good question. Number one, and this happened for me, is your emotional health is your responsibility. Period. End of story. It doesn't matter if you have the best partner in the world. It doesn't matter if you are, 10 years old and your parents are there for you. It's still up to you. Like, and this is kind of, I feel like, your caregivers, if you're young and you're suffering from depression, are there to give you the tools to take care of yourself. They're there to teach you the tools to take care of yourself. That's the thing that I didn't have. And so I would always look to other people to take care of my mental health. And being an only child, I was definitely loved a lot, and my parents definitely took care of my mental health. I'm not blaming for them by any means. Everything came from a place of love. But then if you put me in a relationship, I would constantly wait. I would think that I needed to wait for the perfect response from my partner in order to get happy again. And one of the most disillusioning things is to get that perfect response and realize I'm still not happy. And then you wake up and realize, like, wait, it's on me. Like, this is all my crap I'm carrying on. So my emotional health is my responsibility. And so this is the number one important thing wherever you are in your mental health journey. Your mental health is your responsibility. Don't put that on anyone else. Don't make it be your partner's job to make sure you take your medication. There's some mental health illnesses that really require medication on a daily basis. And if you know there are particular things that you need to do to keep whatever mental health illness you're dealing with at bay, that is up to you. If you need to, I know I need to meditate every day. I know that I need to seek counsel in a spiritual sense every day. I know that I need to tune. I need to keep myself really clear in that way. I can't put that on anyone else. No one can meditate for me. No one can do that for me. I got to do that myself. So I think that's really, really important. So recognize if you've given the power of your mental health to someone else, and if you have, take it back and apologize to those people. Hey, I'm really sorry. I used to cry and throw a tantrum every time, you said you were going, away for the weekend. And I realized that was about me feeling a sense of abandonment, and I'm going to work on that with me. And I do hope that, I love you, and I know you love me too. And let's work on us feeling supported. So this is emotional maturity is very hard to come by, and it only starts when you take responsibility for your own mental health, number one. Number two, if you're a partner and your partner is is suffering from suffering from mental illness, and they're in the throes of it, do not be an enabler. This is really, really hard. Like, do not enable them. Do not coddle them, but support them. So in other words, if you see that they're helping themselves, validate them for helping themselves. How can I help you help yourself right now? Don't go in and try to swoop in and be the hero. They're there and they're suffering, and there's something in you that you just want to go in and you just want to hug them and make it better. Hey, baby, the world is okay. Like, it's okay. I'm here for you. No. That's, unfortunately, like, that's a little bit of an enablement, because then it's like you just gave candy to, your toddler that was, acting out. So then it's almost like a program. So then, or like your dog's like throwing a fit. So then you give your dog a treat, and then the dog throws a fit, you give it a treat. What happens? You get more fits. Unfortunately, we're just like that. So then it's like you're having a total depressive breakdown, and then you're crying. So you get hugged. So then you cry, you get more hugged. You don't feel loved, you cry, you get hugged. So then there's like, I don't feel loved, I cry, I get hugged. So then it's like this weird sort of enabling behavior that actually makes the mental health illness much worse. So you have to figure out, yourself. If you're in a relationship with someone that has a mental health illness, you have to look, and this is kind of some hard words, so I'm sorry if this offends anyone. It really comes from a place of trying to create emotionally stable relationships. You have to look at your own codependency. Why are you in the relationship with the person who's like this, and how can you both heal? And this is really important. How are you attached to being the hero? Is there some sort of a sense of, I'm going to swoop in and save the day? Do you need to be with someone who needs to be saved? Why do you need to be with someone who needs to be saved? What is that doing for you? And how can you work on your own self so that you can communicate love, support, and really help the person that you're with know that they're loved, that they're accepted for who they are. You're not rejecting them. You're really supporting them, and give them the tools, and help them find and give them the tools and the support that are going to help them find their own way out.
Yeah, I think you said that so beautifully. And yeah, I think it's so hard for the people who are the loved ones of those suffering, because they really have to, your initial humanness wants to reach out and love them and make them feel better, but you have to a lot of times resist that urge and see how you were talking earlier, come from that wise mind that realizes that visceral desire to soothe them is actually not healthy or helping them in the long term. So thank you for that. I think that's wise. So closing up here, is there any last just words of hope or inspiration that you'd like to offer to anybody, maybe people out there who particularly just haven't made that step to go get help or get treatment, and maybe they're aided by that, or any...
The most important thing is you're not alone. No matter how lonely you feel, no matter how unique and personal your struggle feels, you're not alone. There are people out there that you can connect with, whether it's online. There are tools. If you don't feel comfortable, or if you can't afford to go to a therapist office and talk to a therapist, work out of books. do a meditation practice. I have a lot of free meditations on YouTube, and those are some easy things to start with. Vipassana is donation based. If you have it in you to sign up for the 10-day meditation course, do it. If you're hesitant to go out there in the world, the online space can be a really big support. Join a chat room, join a forum, reach out, send emails to people, like reach out. I can't tell you how many emails or messages I get from people that are struggling from depression out there, whether they send me a message or whether they're practicing with me online, whether it's on my channel or somewhere else, or come to a workshop. And that first step forward, whatever it is really, really important, because it's a step for you. Don't rely on anyone else for the journey, but just know you are not alone. You're not alone, and it's other people that are out there. The sooner you reach out, the better. That will help you in the journey. Spiritually, you're not alone. Whether or not you're comfortable with a particular incarnation of faith, God is there and is there for you. And in your deepest moments of darkness, reach out from your heart and reach out and you know, I really believe that in our moments of deepest need, that's when that presence of love, that presence of eternality, that is the truth of God, comes out. And just be open and receptive to it. When you're down on your knees and you're down and out and you're humble and you're lying there, it's God that comes in and lifts you up. So you are not alone. And just remember that no matter how dark it gets, you're not alone.
Thank you for sharing that. I know those words will really help some people out there. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much today to talk about this. And I know that some of the people are watching, especially the ones that maybe haven't been familiar with you, might be interested in learning more about you and your story. And I know that you have a lot of wonderful resources for people to practice. Can you share just some of the ways that people can follow up with you? And I'll be sure to include links as well in that. But
thank you.
Just let us know how we can find more resources from you.
So the first thing is I have an online yoga channel, which is called OmStars, and this has a lot of online yoga classes, also some insight classes, a lot of meditation classes and courses, healthy living tips and vegan recipes and aspects about the yogi culture. And we're going to be developing more content that really tells the real story of what it means to be a yogi. I feel like right now in the online space, there's all of this kind of sensationalism about, like the glamour of the yoga world, and we really want to tell the story of, like, the person is getting up on their mat by themselves and battling depression and just claiming that 5 minutes of practice as the beginning of changing their life. So in this online space, there are really a lot of tools that kind of support the journey, particularly the meditation courses, I think are really, really useful. Of course, the practice courses, but again, sometimes practice is overwhelming. So just 5 minutes a day of meditation can be a really important place to start. The second thing is I have a new book that's just called the Yogi Assignment Book. And this is a really good kind of day-by-day way to integrate the lessons of the yoga practice into your life. And there's some really good kind of easy life takeaway points from each chapter. And then the last thing is I always love when students come to class. So my full schedule is always on my website. And I'm going to be up in Seattle in that region, I think in January, February. I can't remember next year. February. Maybe February next year. Yeah.
Yeah, I looked at your schedule and I was like, this woman gets a globe.
Yeah. So. I like travel, so yeah.
So there's definitely lots of opportunities for people to come and study.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, I will definitely share links about that. And again, thank you so much for this conversation. And I look forward to trying out the OmStars and checking out your new book and diving kind of deeper into the practice with some of the insights that you've been sharing. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.